My name is Bob. I have two brothers. My youngest brother isn't the sharpest tool in the tool shed. He is short, only 5'3". His red hair thinning, going towards bald by 22. He is quick-tempered, entitled, and has a history of making terrible choices. We come from a family of some means. Yep, we were trust fund babies, so my brother always had access to chunks of cash. However, they were pretty small trust funds. Not nearly enough to support us for life, but there was enough to make life more comfortable. Perhaps even enough get us out of a scrap a time or two. My brother liked to flash his good fortune around a bit. He always had the newest of whatever. He always dressed well, and he was a compulsive neat freak. He even ironed his underwear. My brother also has a heck of a musical talent. He plays keyboards. If he hears a song once, he can play it back note for note anytime you ask. He could rock out with the best of them. It is really pretty amazing. He and his band harbored hope of the big time. I think their band was called the X-Rays or something kinda like that. They played in bars and hotels up and down the I-5. They did okay. They mostly played covers, but they also wrote some stuff. They could get the house rockin' with cover songs, but when they played one of their songs, crickets. My brother and his bandmates were amazing parrots, but neither he nor anyone else in the band could write anything remotely original. My brother bankrolled the band. He bought effects equipment so their shows were always flashy. He bought a van so the band could get to their gigs. He enjoyed being the leader of the band, and was generally a jerk as a boss. Of course, they were on the road as much of the time as they could. His first wife, Carol, was the bass player's girlfriend. She was hot in a trashy way. She traded the bass player in for the keyboard player. Turns out she was a bit of a cover band groupie. Seriously, I never knew there was such a thing. It seems she started with the drummer. She also was a gold digger, and when she figured out my brother had some money, it was all over but the shouting. I didn't have a lot of contact with my brother back in those days, so I honestly don't know much about what their lives were like. They dated for 5 or 6 months and announced they were getting married. As I really didn't know her, I didn't have any feelings about their marriage. However, most of my family was, well, let's just say, they weren't impressed. For me, my first-hand experience with my brother's wife was at the end of their rehearsal dinner. As the guys in the family started out for the bachelor party, she went off ranting and raving. Seems she didn't want him out at the clubs the night before their wedding. Hey, I understood her issue, but in this case, she had agreed to it in advance, after she had rejected all the dates put forward until this was the only possible time for it before the wedding. So, the whole throwing a fit thing was a bit much. It was just her being difficult or a very insecure girl. Bottom line, she didn't want him to have a bachelor party. My brother had come out to the waiting limos saying he just couldn't go. I said nonsense to him. I went inside to talk to her. I told her that my dad and my uncles and other family and my family's friends had taken time out for this. I also pointed out that many of the others were fairly well-to-do, and they most likely gave them some pretty nice gifts, so she should be more reasonable. Also, I promised it wasn't going to get out of hand. After what seemed like hours of tears and threats, she finally relented. What a pain. We went off to have the bachelor party. It was totally messed up. My little brother was so controlled he was no fun. He pretty much was sitting at a table in the back weeping into his beer. That put a damper on the whole thing. I think we were at the club for under an hour when we loaded back into the limos and headed home. We had him tucked into bed by 10 p.m. Now, we had the limos all night, and we had been looking forward to this get-together for some time. It isn't very often that the guys in my family get together en masse. I like to say that the only time we get together is when we married them or buried them. So of course we jumped back into the limos and then headed out. We had a blast. My dad was flinging $100 bills around. At one point he had 3 dancers giving him a private dance. My Uncle Jack got lucky with one of the dancers in his limo. My Uncle John got arrested. My cousin Fred dove into the booze and went MIA. My other brother got sick on a dancer while he was in the front row. It was a heck of a bachelor party, for having no bachelor, that is. What can I say? My brother really missed a great bachelor party. We, on the other hand, almost missed the wedding. I think the only guys who weren't hungover were my brother and the priest. The wedding went off. They were hitched. She moved in with my brother and brought her 3-year-old son, Charlie, with her. And everyone's life goes on. It was a couple of years later. I needed some signatures from my brother. I called him and we agreed to meet later in the day. He said he would be around his house that day, but he might run some errands. So if he wasn't there, hang out, and he would be back soon. A couple of hours later, I dropped by my brother's house. It was one of those fantastic September afternoons. It was in the 80s, warm and beautiful. I arrived to find his front door was wide open. Being such a nice day, that didn't surprise me. I stepped in, calling out my brother's name. No response. I looked around. No one seemed to be home. I called out my brother's name again, but still no response. No noise from his dogs, no noise from his stepkid, and 5-year-old boys make noise. Then I noticed the coat rack knocked over. There was a wine glass on the floor. I started to get a very bad feeling. I looked down the hallway, and I saw the torn remnants of a woman's blouse. I heard some noise coming from the back of the house and stepped down the hall following the noise. I look in the kid's room. It's a mess. But what spoiled 5-year-old's room wasn't? No kid. I grabbed the kid's baseball bat out of his room. Past the bathroom, I pause at the doorway to my brother's bedroom. I hear grunting and smacking. I peek in to get the lay of the land. There is my brother's wife, tied to the bed with a gag in her mouth. Her eyes are glassy. She doesn't see me. The dude is a big guy. Goodness. Man Mountain's muscles rippled as he was with her. Damn, it looked like he was hurting her. She was making a gurgling noise. I pulled back. Shoot, I thought. I'm ashamed to admit that at that moment I did think about just saying, forget this. She wasn't my favorite person. But damn, I can't just let her get attacked after all. She is my brother's wife. Man, I'm gonna get my rear kicked. Darn, darn, darn. I turned back. Deep breaths. I am gonna have one shot at this, and all I have is this wimpy kid's baseball bat. It's too small to even get a good two-handed swing. I could just see myself breaking the bat on this dude and then having my rear handed to me. The jerk is yelling, "Woman, take it!" Doing his thing hard and fast. I thought, it's now or never. I crept into my brother's bedroom. My goodness, he has quite a physique. Gosh, he's massive. I see him assaulting her. Oh gosh, I'm gonna die. I line up and pull my arm way back and up. As the kid's baseball bat swings down, it's a near-perfect hit, right on his sensitive area. The bat shattered on impact, leaving me holding about a 7-inch remnant. The guy flew up in the air. He never screamed, but I did hear all the air blow out of his lungs. He landed half on the bed and the floor. He was in a kneeling position with his chest on the bed, then he drooped onto the floor with a thud. I was worried I had killed him. Then I noticed his body spasming and realized he was alive. I let out a sigh. I didn't want to be a murderer. I whipped out my phone and called 911. 911, how can we help? I'm at my brother's house. His wife was being attacked. I need police and medical help. Oh gosh! I dropped the phone. I couldn't believe it when the Man Mountain started to come back to life. I backed away from him. I could see the side of his face. It was surreal seeing his bulging eye move from cloudy to clear and turn towards me. Oh crud, I'm gonna die, I thought. I looked around for something to defend myself with. Then I realized I was still holding what was left of the bat. Christ, he was going to get up. He was on his hands and knees. He groaned and started to take deep breaths. There was murder in his eyes. He started towards me. I actually screamed like a little girl. I guess it was just my reaction to the fear of my death. Then I kicked him in his groin with everything I had. He went down like a sack of flour. I started to try and loosen the silk tie from her right arm. She was coming around. Her eyes weren't so glassy. I had to get us out of there before the jerk could get up again. How he got up the first time was beyond me. I was sure I ruined his parts with the baseball bat. I couldn't believe that hadn't taken him down. At that point, I wasn't even certain the jerk was human. I looked down at my sister-in-law. She looked upset. Her eyes weren't glassy. They were wide open and stared at me angrily. She was making a lot of noise, but I couldn't understand what she was saying because of the ball gag. She was struggling so hard against the ties that were restraining her that it made untying her impossible. Her face is a mask of anger. She is screaming, and spit is drooling out of her mouth. She is tossing her body back and forth like she is possessed by a demon. I figured she was upset at being attacked. I heard the cops come in the front of the house. "Back here!" I yelled at them. The cops crowded into the room. The jerk was starting to come around. "Oh, God," was what he said. And then there was moaning and babbling and crying and gurgling. There was a lot of yelling and gun waving. I got cuffed and let out as the EMTs headed in. They put me in the back of a squad car. One cop asked me what happened. I told him about finding the front door open, the wine glass, the coat rack, and the ripped-up blouse, and then me finding my sister-in-law getting attacked. At about that point, they rolled the jerk out and into an ambulance. It must have been about 15 minutes when the EMTs walked my brother's wife out in a blanket. She looked at me with hate blazing out of her eyes. Scary. Really, really scary. Shoot, the jerk must have really done a number on her. Sad. I must have been in the car 30 minutes or so when one of the cops came by. He had a smirk on his face. "We got to take you down to the station," the cop said as he hopped in the car. The cops found it pretty funny. I guess the little slugger bat damaged the jerk pretty effectively. What was left of his parts was mush. His anatomy was ruptured in 123 separate places. Basically, I shattered him. From the perspective of Mick. Mick as a child was scrawny, but his anatomy was always just a bit too big. In grade school, after PE class, the boys would shower together and laugh at Mick's extra-sized anatomy. It seemed to be bigger than his thigh. Boys at age 6 and 7 were not clued into what a large physique would mean after puberty. The teasing and bullying rained down on Mick for years. Children can be so cruel. Mick found peace at a local gym. He liked to lift weights. It was just Mick and the weights. Day after day, Mick lifted weights. By the time he was 15, his body was rock hard. His last growth spurt brought him up to 6 foot 5 inches, and now his anatomy looked just right on him. But the teasing never left the little scrawny boy that lived inside Mick. At 25, Mick was a god. Women fell all over themselves when he was around. He especially liked to take married women. Somewhere in his twisted subconscious, each wife he was with was revenge on all the boys who had tormented Mick in his youth. The married women around town whispered about Mick and his impressive anatomy. Those facts spread like wildfire among the women in town. Yes, for Mick, life was good. One day he was with a random wife in the afternoon when, during a pause in the action, he saw the next-door neighbor lady interested as she marched over from next door. Her name was Carol. Carol had been in her backyard when she heard her next-door neighbor, Maybelle, yelling and enjoying herself on Mick. Carol could see into the master bedroom through the sliding glass door that opened to the backyard. Carol was flush with excitement. She was going to get herself some of that experience. She headed to the sliders. Mick left Maybelle, who cried, "Come back!" and opened the door for Carol. Up close, Carol was even more impressed. Here was 6 feet 5 inches, 225 pounds, of rippling muscles attached to an impressive physique, the likes Carol had only dreamt of being with. In her many days and nights of being under different men, Carol had never seen a better, more beautiful example of the perfect physique being attached to the most amazing man. "Hi, I want you to be with me," said Carol. Looking up into his blue eyes, she added, "Right now." Her legs were weak, but she was excited. Mick wasn't surprised. This type of situation happened to him all the time. While Carol was pretty, she wasn't stellar. Her chest was a bit small, and she just seemed trashy. "Look, lady, no offense, but unless you got something pretty special, I'm busy with this woman. Maybe some other time." He closed the slider. turned around to Maybelle and started with her, hard, brutally hard. Carol, accustomed to having her way, was shocked. No man ever told her no. It just wasn't allowed. But in this case, he had the physique she had to have. Carol lost it. She was screaming and hammering the glass door with her fists, yelling, "You gotta be with me! Everyone wants to be with me!" Mick continued with Maybelle, who by this point was incoherent and approaching the greatest experience of her life. Mick finally got fed up with the banging and screaming coming from Carol. Frankly, it was irritating him. He left Maybelle, who was now whimpering, and headed over to the sliding door. "Look, miss, you have nothing I want. Go home to your husband." "I need you, please, please be with me," Carol pleaded. "Why should I?" asked Mick. "You can do anything." Mick had seen it all before. These women, some of them just wouldn't hear no. "Okay, princess, go home. Pour me a glass of wine. I will be over after I finish up here." He slid the door closed, turning back to Maybelle, whose features were heaving, and resumed with her. As Carol watched her neighbor being with Mick, she felt herself getting excited. She was quite interested as she watched. Mick looked over his shoulder and mouthed, "Get going, you're next." Carol rushed home. Her husband was playing with her son and the dogs. She shooed them out. "Go to the dog park, then get little Charlie some ice cream. I need you out now, and don't come back till it's dinner time." Her husband was saying something about a meeting, but Carol would have none of it. She stamped her foot. "Go! Go now!" Her husband, a wimp and a controlled wimp to boot, backed down. Now, dear!" Carol started shoving her husband, kid, and 2 dogs out the front door. She smiled as they loaded up into their new Cadillac Escalade and drove away. True to his word, Mick showed up about 15 minutes later. Carol had changed into a short skirt and a semi-transparent blouse. She'd picked up the kids' toys and dumped them in Charlie's room. She poured 2 glasses of wine and got herself ready for Mick. When he walked through the open front door, Carol launched herself at him, knocking a wine glass over and smashed into the coat rack by the front door, knocking it over. "Okay, miss, here is what is going to happen," as Mick reached out and ripped her blouse off. "First, I am going to take you, and if I am pleased, then I may decide to continue in other ways." Carol whimpered with joy and desire. Mick knew that not many women could come close to handling his impressive physique. Normally, when he was with a housewife in that way, there was much screaming and crying. Mick disliked distractions, so he had learned that using a gag helped keep things quiet. He held up a ball gag to Carol. Her eyes got large, and there was quivering in her tummy. Now Carol liked to talk, and she lived to order men around. It should be noted that for her to accept the gag was totally out of character. When she opened her mouth and let him stuff the ball gag in, it should tell you how much she wanted that experience. He tightened the ball gag and pulled her to the master bedroom. He tossed her on the bed, grabbed a couple of her husband's silk ties, and used them to tie her arms to the headboard. Then he proceeded for the deed. For Carol, it was utter agony. She felt herself hurting, and then hurting more. White-hot pain lanced through her. She screamed continuously for over 5 of the longest minutes of her life. Mick was brutal. That is when Mick felt pain. His anatomy exploded in pain, and his groin, well, it simply exploded. When he came to, he was in such agony that he couldn't see. As his eyes started to clear, he could see a man with a broken little kid's baseball bat. Mick didn't know who he was, but with Mick's history with women, he figured it was the woman's husband. Shoot. He smiled to himself. He always liked beating the daylights out of husbands who found Mick with their wives. He loved how he could beat them thoroughly, and the women would lie and defend him. Even if the husband didn't clear out, they never bothered Mick again, as he was with their wives in the future. Mick got up on his hands and knees and took a breath or two, shaking off the pain in his groin. He hurt badly. It was the worst hurt he had ever felt, and that guy was gonna pay. Mick rose up and turned on the man. The guy's eyes got big, almost as big as Carol's eyes had been when she watched Mick and Maybelle. Mick smiles. He could see this wimp was terrified, as well as he should be. Then the man screamed like a little girl and kicked Mick in what was left of his groin. The lights went out in Mick's eyes as he collapsed in a heap on the bedroom floor. Mick came to the hospital. He was cuffed to the bed. There was a cop in the room who alerted the nurses that Mick was conscious. Soon, several nurses were flooding into Mick's room. They fluffed his pillows, trying to make Mick as comfortable as possible. All the female nurses seemed very sad. A bit later, the doctor came in to talk to Mick. Mick and the hovering nurses learned about the damage that he had suffered. Apparently, there were 123 massive ruptures in his anatomy, which just couldn't be repaired. The damage was so severe that the doctor said he would never function again. Adding insult to injury, Mick's private parts had been utterly crushed to pulp. Apparently, the baseball bat had done enough damage to his groin that when the kick landed, they had been totally scrambled. There was no hope for him, and the doctor explained that parts had been removed. All in all, Mick was lucky to be alive. At best, he would work well enough so Mick could take a bathroom break. However, he would need to take care when relieving himself, as it would spray in several directions as several ruptures were now open channels for Mick. As the nurses heard the bad news about Mick, they whispered to each other in horror. Word spread through the female population about his demise. The women who had been with him wept for what had been. For the women who hadn't, they sobbed for what would never be. The men around town were smiling. Switching back to my perspective. Eventually, the facts came out. Carol was just another unfaithful housewife that Mick had scored with. She was severely injured and would be wearing adult diapers for the rest of her life. Mick, well, he was broken. He quit weightlifting and all his muscles turned to fat. These days, he tips the scales at about 450 pounds, all lard. His anatomy had been rendered useless. One could always tell when Mick used the bathroom. Even though he wrapped a towel around himself, it was never good enough and there would be a mess on the walls, floor, ceiling, and Mick. As for me, I hired some damned expensive lawyers. Our defense was that I was defending my sister-in-law from an attack. How was I to know that it was consensual? My lawyers pointed out to the DA that they would work to get an all-male married jury. The DA was convinced that a jury trial would be a loser. He also was aware of Mick. Apparently, Mick had been with his wife, too. He refused to press charges. Mick did sue me. The jury was 9 men, all married, and 2 women, both lesbians. They found me guilty in the civil trial, but only awarded Mick $1 for damages. Sometimes lawyers are your best friends. The real mind-blower for me was that my brother took her back. I told you he made terrible choices. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.